Okay, so today we're going to talk about the history of advertising. Okay, so by the end of the lesson, there are three things that you should be able to explain or discuss with your friends and everybody else. Okay, by the end of the lesson, you should be able to understand development of advertising. You should understand the history and evolution of advertising. Then at the end, we'll do a practical activity, okay, that will just, you know, require you to understand the concept of advertising in general. Okay, so we have evolution of advertising, uh, when advertising started. Okay, uh, okay, let me put this full screen. Okay, so advertising started a long time ago, back in the day. Okay, and this subject is very, like I said last Monday, it's very broad, and the development, the innovations, and the creative ideas of advertising industry. It's very important to understand and to study. Okay, so the mass media advertising industry, as we know it today, it developed in the 19th century in England, in the United States, and in France. And this happened nearly at the same time. Okay, so these are the countries in which we find most of the pioneers of advertising. By pioneers, I mean this is where we find ancient advertising. Okay, so however, advertising innovation that includes advertising in different shapes and forms can be traced back thousands of years ago. Okay, so let's look at those ancient advertising. Okay, so as you know, advertising is connected to humankind and to the evolution of humans and its technical progress. Okay, so the need of publishing facts and products, quality, or even required service is a spontaneous spiritual tendency of a tradesman. Everybody would want everybody to know about their products. Okay, so researchers have said the first steps of advertising were in ancient empires in Egypt, in Babylonian times. Okay, so in Egypt, they used what they call papyrus, promoting slaves, sales, and rewards. So papyrus, it was where they can write, I'm selling this slave for 10 silver or 10 coins or whatever. So it was like a piece of paper where they actually write and advertise that I do have slaves. So this used to happen in Egypt back in the day, and rewards as well. Okay, so they used data splits with inscriptions about salesmen, shoemakers, and clerks. As you can see on the picture there, these are the beginning days of advertising. Okay. Then the Greeks as well used the street callers who announced the ship's arrival and its cargo for mentals, wine, and spices. When they say street callers, these were people who would be calling out in the street. Like nowadays, we have people who are giving out flyers. Back then in Greek, when ships arrived with different products, there'll be people calling out and shouting out. We have wine here, we have slaves here, we have all these things. So there was another form of advertising that used to happen in Greece. Okay, so the piece of papyrus, ancient Egypt paper that you can see there, is one of the oldest advertisements discovered to date. It is estimated to be around 5,000 years old. Okay. Another example of ancient advertising that we have to include sometimes, it includes clay, bricks, and pottery from ancient Babylon. You know, Babylon is one of those ancient countries that we found even in the Bible. So they used to use clay bricks and pottery to advertise whatever that they were advertising. It can be their products, it can be wine, it can be different things. Okay. This was a method used by kings to advertise themselves to their subjects and garner support. So this was more of a political advertising, where now the king was advertising himself to his subjects or to the population, or in trying to gain support. Remember, if we go back to our definition of advertising, it is there to persuade customers to buy either your products or your services. Here again, we find that in ancient Babylon, as the king was advertising himself to his subjects or to the population, he was doing this to garner support. Okay. So remember now, in politics, in political advertisement, we have the very same thing where advertisers from political perspectives are there to garner support. Okay. In the Iron Age, okay, during the Iron Age era, the Greek potters branded their wares using mottos, brands, and trademarks. These were all different scenarios that they used to use. Alternatively, they signed pots with their name. Even people engaged in competing advertising. Okay, in one example, someone staged the following words into his pot, better than Euphonics could have ever done. Okay, so this is early days. Remember, this is Iron Age. So in Iron Age, they used to use pot to advertise uh, their ideas as well. Okay, then we have Jin Lu, who advertised his fine needle shop 1,000 years ago using both words. This was in China now. A brand mascot, a rabbit holding a needle. Okay, so you see how creative this advert was. This is thousands of years ago in China. This guy, he used a rabbit holding a needle. Okay, so this was engraved into a copper plate to allow for paper copies to be produced in quantity. So he advertised the rabbit holding a needle. He's advertising for a needle, and he used a copper plate. Why did he use a copper plate? In order for copy for copies to be made from that copper plate. That was the method that they used to use back in the day. Okay. Then we have Egyptians. Egyptians made posters out of papyrus, and political and commercial advertising has been found on the walls of the ruins in Arabia and Pompeii. These are also ancient cities. So in Egypt, also they used to use posters, paper. So you see, the era of advertising or the use of posters, it has a long pedigree. Okay. Also in Rome, an important media was known as album, which consisted in a board of blanched wall where they published edits and laws together with promotions of gladiators, fighters, and theater representation. Okay, so in Rome, they created what they call an album. We all know a photo album these days. This is the origin of the photo album. So in this album, they would advertise gladiators. Gladiators, these were the people that would fight. Okay, they would fight in a ring, they would kill each other in a ring. This was a very famous sport back in the days in Rome and in Pompeii. Okay, so they would also advertise their theater representations as well. Okay, so as for now, we can actually tell, we can see where advertising comes from. Okay, thousands of years ago in ancient cities. These are very ancient cities: Rome, Pompeii, Egypt. Okay. While advertising can be traced back over centuries, mass media advertising as we know it today developed alongside the advances in mass communication. As such, the two are inseparably linked and they function in a mutually beneficial way. Advertising involves sending messages via mass communication, and mass communication organizations use advertising as a source of income. Okay, what does that two statement mean? It means now the evolution of media, we call it mass media, the evolution of newspapers, at that, this developed also advertisements. So advertisements, they developed or they were aided in their way of developing by mass communication, particularly the print media, the newspapers. Okay, so now they realized that now we can now advertise in newspapers, and they started advertising in newspapers. So the mass communication companies back then that were concentrating on newspapers realized that we can actually make money with the people that are advertising. And advertisers now realized as well, we need these mass communication companies to advertise our products or our services. That's why they're saying these two are linked, they're interconnected. Okay. Uh, in the UK, advertisements were simple posters, notices that were pasted to walls and hoardings. However, innovation struck in the 19th century. Okay, so in the United Kingdom, at first, it was very simple. They would just start with the posters. They'll put posters on walls. Okay. That's how it started. But however, it changed in the 19th century. Okay. Advertisements started to appear in weekly newspapers. Okay. So the development of newspapers aided the development of advertisements. So advertisements started to appear weekly in newspapers, then later in ladies' journals, generally targeted at the affluent sectors of the society. So it started advertisement that used to appear in journals, it was targeting the rich class, those who are better in society, who could read, who could afford the price of the newspaper or journal. So at the beginning, the newspaper was expensive. Only the rich class could afford the newspaper. So those adverts were targeting those that can afford to buy a newspaper and those that can read. Okay. And also who had the leisure to time to spend on reading and who could ultimately afford the product's advertisement. Okay. Then the printing press that happened in 1438, Gutenberg printing press. This began the era of mass communication. In that now, it printed materials could be mass produced. By this, they mean they could print thousands or hundreds of thousands of printed materials. Whereas prior to the printing press, books and other printed materials had to be made individually. So before the invention of the printing press in 1438, there was no mass production of printed materials. If a book was to be made, it was made individually. You have to make that book individually. Just think of it now. When we print books, we print in bulk, we print in thousands, we print in hundreds of thousands, or we print in millions. That's what the statement is saying. So before the printing press, books were made individually. And London printed the first English newspaper in 1622, and the first advertisement appeared in 1625. That was the first advert. Okay, it appeared in 1625. Okay, uh, let me show you this video, just a minute long, about the history of advertising. It sums up everything that I was explaining to you.
And now, the history of advertising in 60 seconds. Advertising is as old as the human condition, with branded, product-based ads didn't show up until the 18th century when print advertising became the norm. In the 1800s, we got the first billboards and ad agencies began to set up shop. In 1891, companies like Kodak began selling their brand, not just their product. Then, in 1908, new companies like Ford staged flashy publicity events and pioneered the art of looking cool. The soap opera was born when soap companies discovered the popularity of radio dramas among women when they did their house.
Delivered by the makers of Lux toilets.
Olga watches made the first television commercial to cost $9. And when psychologists got involved in the 1960s, focus groups transformed the industry into a calculated science. The tactics got a lot less predictable, and the budgets got a lot bigger. Enter the internet. Even though it looked like this and sounded like, advertisers were eager to engage the growing network of more than 5 million users. By the year 2000, ads were appearing alongside search results, driven by consumer interests. Now, advertising is just part of the conversation. For the first time in history, consumers are able to choose the ads they see based on their own taste. And brands are working with publishers to create content. It's a whole new world. Welcome to modern advertising.
Okay. As you can see there, okay. Zenzo, so far, what would you say about the history of advertising in a nutshell?
Well, I'd say that it started in such a way that people had to find a way to communicate with everyone and had to find an easy way to do so. So creating posters back then was the ideal thing, because we know that in ancient movies you'd find like these wanted posters, when they want a criminal and stuff, then they put up these posters and so forth. So I feel like it started way before, and as we know that even Christians used to use scrolls and so forth to depict the Bible and so forth. So I feel like in essence it started vele by people wanting to communicate with a huge amount of people. And by doing so, it basically evolved in such a way that newspapers were created, after newspaper slogans were created. And yeah, now we've got we've got mass production of newspapers, all of that.
Correct. Okay. So the evolution of advertising is very interesting. It shows us, just like the evolution of humankind. We started from using stone, iron, up to now using computers. It's the same thing that happened with advertising. It started from the early ancient days, using of old-fashioned rocks, paintings, things like that. Then it developed up to where we are now. We have websites now. We have social media now. Before that, before the internet advertising, we had newspapers. Okay, we moved to television advertising. We moved to film advertisements. We moved to radio advertising. So that's the evolution of advertisement up to what we have now, the variety of advertisement. Okay, so let's look at the pioneers in advertising. So the history of advertising can be traced back to civilization, to Egypt, to Pompeii, to Rome. Okay, so it became a major force in capitalist economies in the mid-19th century, based on newspapers and magazines. Okay, then later on in the 20th century, advertising grew rapidly with new technologies such as now direct mail, radio, television, internet, and mobile devices. Okay, so that's the 20th century. Moving up to the 21st century now, where we have advanced internet, social media, advanced websites, etc., etc. Okay, so if we look at those images, it contains some of the most famous examples that changed the face of advertising in their days. Okay, we look at those three pictures. These were early advertisements. Okay, the Hollows, Pills, and Ointment, the US Army advertising, I want you for US Army, nearest recruitment station, they're advertising that we want you to join the Army. Okay, then we have the soap company there also advertising soap, a skin you love to touch. These are early examples of advertisements. Okay, now in this table, it gives you major pioneers, okay, in terms of the development of advertisements. 1447, that's Gutenberg, who invented the printing press, allowing for mass printation of printing materials. 1631, the French newspaper. 1732, then we have Benjamin Franklin, published his first magazine, Advent, in his general magazine. So the first magazine advertisement was produced in 1742. Okay, so this was followed a year later with the first half-page newspaper, Advent, in the New York Weekly Journal. Okay, so 1742 is very important. We have the first magazine, Advent. Then later on, we had the first full-page newspaper. Okay, then as history moved, 1786, William Taylor became the world's first advertising agent. And later, he launched Taylor Norton Company, moved on to the 1830s with Thomas Holloway, 1870, 1890, 1911, and 1940. Okay, you go through these notes as usual. I will send them to you. Okay. So now, let's evaluate the following statements and state whether you agree or disagree. Okay, I can see a hand there. Zianda, please go ahead.
If you're showing anything on the slides, I actually can't see it.
You can't see the slide.
No, I can only see the first one, and then I think you're carrying on, but it's actually not showing. So I don't know what's the problem.
Okay. Zenzo and Akona, can you see the slides?
No, I've just been looking at my own one on the laptop, but
okay,
this one is not moving.
Yeah, it's not moving. It's stuck on the history of advertising.
What about now?
60 seconds.
Now can you see?
Yeah.
You can see my screen now.
Yeah, it's moving now.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's look at the questions. Okay. Evaluate the following statements and state whether you agree or disagree. So this is open to everybody. We're going to discuss this, everybody. Explain your reasoning. So either you agree or you disagree. If you agree, you explain to us why you agree with this statement. If you disagree, you tell us why. Okay. So I'll just pick anybody. Okay. The ancient forms of advertising are no longer relevant in the 21st century. Akona, what do you think?
To a certain extent, I agree and disagree at the same time, because yes, times have evolved, but we are still using similar forms of advertising and from ancient forms right now, in terms of like advertising on TV and
But is
using posters.
advertising on TV an ancient form?
It is, but it's not, because it's constantly evolving as well. So
Okay.
I don't know if I could just box it in.
In ancient times, did we have TV?
Actually, no. Now I think about it.
Okay.
I'm thinking more of like recent ancient times. Okay, no,
Mhm.
no, they didn't.
Okay, so remember
So,
ancient times, we said during the early days of Egypt, Rome, Pompeii, they used to use bricks.
okay.
Mhm. So they are saying those forms that were
So,
used during that time, do you think they're still relevant this era?
okay, no, they're not. Okay,
Why are you saying
they're
that?
not.
Why, okay, why are you saying that?
Times have evolved. As much as posters and things that are being written down, like how in ancient times advertising was done, everything now is more digital.
Mhm.
And everything's online. So it's not the same compared to how things were in Rome and Pompeii, because they didn't have technology. Everything was like written, or yeah.
Okay, that's correct. I agree. So the ancient forms are no longer relevant. They are no longer in use in the 21st century. Who's going to advertise on a clay pot, you know? But however, it is advanced now. You can actually advertise on a cup. You can brand either a coffee mug, you can brand a beer mug, things like that, isn't it? So it has moved away from that ancient one where you can just do a rock painting or shout, things like that. So it has moved. Now we have television. Now we have radio. Now we have digital newspapers that you can access on your cell phone, that you can access on your laptop, that you can access anywhere else, even the physical newspapers. So the ancient forms, no longer relevant. Okay. So question 2, explain the difference between the peers. Okay, that's one. Number 3, identify the following elements of advertising history. Okay, the title of Benjamin Franklin publication that featured the first magazine advertisement. Do you think the first publication was important? Zenzo.
What is the question?
Remember Benjamin Franklin, he published the first magazine ad, then he published the first half newspaper ad. Do you think that was important? Did it change advertisements?
Of course it did.
Why are you
I mean,
saying?
it's just like Einstein. It's a way of changing the world. It's a way of showing people that anything is possible. You know, him being the first to do it basically fuels innovation and creativity in others to do the same. So in that sense, it basically encourages people to try by all means to do what he did.
Mhm.
And then that therefore, pioneered the whole advertisement industry, and it fueled other people to be more interested in advertising and mass communication with other people to deliver the message across, and for shop owners or whatever to persuade customers to basically purchase or invest in whatever product or service they're offering.
Yes. So that one, it's the first magazine ad and that newspaper ad, it played a vital role. It introduced people to advertisements in a magazine. So it changed the course of history there. So it is very fundamental in understanding the history of advertisement. Okay. So now let's move on to advertising and the printed words. Okay. So the development of the printing press was the driving force of advertising, which evolved from a face-to-face selling approach. Maybe, for example, using a town crier. Like I say, back in Rome, back in the day, they would shout. If you have watched slave movies, I'm sure you have seen these. They would advertising slaves using face-to-face interaction, or they will be shouting. Okay, so that driving force of advertising, it changed when there was now printing words. Okay, so it changed to printing word. Now we had posters, we had print media advertising. What was the purpose of all this? The purpose was now the print medium, it enabled mass communication. It enabled to reach large volumes of people, okay, to reach a wide audience, okay. The development of newspapers and magazines similarly drove developments in advertising, like I explained before. So this relationship is mutually beneficial, like I was saying. Everybody benefits. The advertiser benefits. Is advertising through a newspaper that will reach a lot of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are going to see his advertisement. Hence, people are going to be aware of his product. The newspaper is going to benefit because it's charging that advertiser to place an advert in his newspaper. Okay, so the relationship there is mutual. Everyone is benefiting. You benefiting as an advertiser, I'm benefiting also as a newspaper institution. Okay, so with the history of printing going back half a century, there's a lot of detail that cannot be included in advertising history, lot. We can study advertising history as a module. Okay, so there's a lot of things to include. Okay. So now, the 20th century, this is very, very important. And 20th century, we're talking of from the 1900 up to 2000. Okay, up to 2000, that's the 19th century. Okay, advertising truly arrived as an industry during this century, evidenced by many milestones and innovations. So remember, in the 20th century, this is when a lot of inventions happened. This is when automobile was invented. This is when an aeroplane was invented during this period. This is when TV was invented. Newspaper production was increased, things like that. So this area is very important in history, not only in advertisement, but in humankind. Okay. Okay, so advertising, it changed during this century. This is evidenced by a lot of things. Okay, so in the middle of the centuries, around 1950s, 1940s, okay, the creative revolution occurred. The medium of photography became increasingly prevalent. Okay, in place of illustration, advertisers displayed unprecedented creativity and print aids aimed for a minimum dazzling, dramatic, and yet realistic effect. So the introduction of photography now into advertisement, into the advertising industry. Photography, it became one of the creative operations of advertising. At the turn of the century, we had a company called Kellogg Company, which placed the first advert for cornflakes in 6 different American newspapers. Within 10 years, the company was spending almost $1 million a year on national advertising. So now you can see the development. Now people are actually investing in advertising. Okay. In 1936, Life magazine published its first edition and later became the first magazine to carry 100 million in advertising annually. Wow. 1936 to have 100 million in advertising, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Probably 100 million 1936, maybe now it may be $1 billion or something. Okay. In 1955, the Marlboro main campaign debuted. Remember the Marlboro advert that we saw on Monday? It debuted in 1959. In this ad, remember last week, we say it changed the game of advertising. Okay. Then in 1959, the DDB created the greatest ad campaign of all time, changing the industry forever. Okay. Then around the 1930s, print advertising was still the major form of communication. When they say print advertising, 1930s, basically they'll be talking about newspapers, okay, and a little bit of magazines, but newspapers by then was the big thing, okay, was still the major form of communication, and advertising volumes in newspapers and magazines was estimated around 1 billion. However, unexpected competitors for print media arrived in the form of radio and television. So before radio and television, newspapers dominated when it comes to advertising. This was the best way. There was no any other way. So newspaper was predominantly a thing back then. Okay. Then the arrival of radio and television, it changed the game as well. As radio and television developed, magazines lost advertising revenue. So that revenue that they were enjoying because they were dominant, it was no longer there because now there was radio now, there was television. So advertisers were again moving into radio, they were moving into television. Okay.